Good morning, everyone. We're going to get started with this session. I'm Ben Peterson. I run the SIGCHI Awards, and I am very happy to have the honor of welcoming and introducing Jake Wobbrock, who, as you know, if you're here, is winning the Social Impact Award, the SIGCHI Social Impact Award. The Social Impact Award is given each year to individuals who promote the application of human-computer interaction research to pressing social needs. The recipient will have past or current work within the HCI profession that demonstrates social benefit. That's the official description of the award. Let me give you just a short description of some of the things that Jake has done, and then of course we'll get to hear his view, his description of how he's done this in great detail. Jake is an associate professor in the Information School at the University of Washington, where he directs the Mobile and Accessible Design Lab and has a number of other roles at UW as well. I first ran into Jake and his work on the support of accessibility going back to Palm OS days, if you can remember that, in 2003 with his early work on EdgeWrite with Brad Myers. That used physical edges in a square template to make it easier to draw straight and more recognizable lines when one is physically impaired. And that might be because you're on a bumpy bus or because you have some kind of motor limitations of yourself. That must have really struck me as personally, because it stayed with me for now nearly 2 decades, and I regularly tell my students about this work because of this nice integration of ability and disability. And really that has informed his work from then on and what he has come to term ability-based design, where the human abilities required to use a technology in a given context are questioned, and systems are made operable by or adaptable to alternative abilities. For example, his slide rule project with Sean Kane and Jeff Bigham was the first to make touchscreen smartphones accessible to blind people using gestures using Apple's VoiceOver design for iOS. Jake's contributions to people with special needs have improved not only their lives, but all of ours. He has been recognized for this work in many ways, receiving an admirable 19 paper awards, including 7 best papers and 7 honorable mentions from CHI. So I'm proud to say I knew you when, and to present you, well, I've already presented him with the actual award, but to recognize publicly his award, and look forward to hearing your description of your work. Thanks, Jake.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Ben. Thanks for coming. I know you have options this morning. I'm pleased that you chose this one. This room is so big that if you're in the back, I can't see you, but come on forward and we'll have a more intimate setting. Today I want to talk to you about ability-based design, elevating ability over disability in accessible computing. And I'm coming from the University of Washington Information School. But as you'll see, a lot of this work, all of this work, took place with many collaborators from different institutions, many of whom or all of whom are part of this community. I'm very grateful and humbled by this community and by this award. And in particular, I want to say that it's especially humbling to be the 3rd recipient from UW for the Social Impact Award just in the last handful of years. I think it shows the commitment that the University of Washington has and its faculty have and its students have in working for the social good. And Batya Friedman and Richard Ladner are big footsteps to follow in. They're actually sitting next to each other right over there. So they're there and they're there at one time in both places. I gave this version of this talk a few months ago in Luxembourg, actually, at the Luxembourg Institute of Science and Technology. And that required me to travel quite a distance. I'd never been there. I had to fly over Greenland, fly through Iceland, and land in Paris, and then take a train. It was a pretty involved excursion. And there's nothing like a long trip, and we've all been on them. There's nothing like a long trip to kind of highlight how physical we are in our bodies in the world. Each one of these modes of transportation that you see behind me, I took, some more than once, some even 3 or 4 times, just to get myself from point A to point B. And it's not just getting myself from point A to point B through the world. It's actually moving all the things that I have with me. And it's not just moving myself and my things, but it's actually doing so while other people are moving themselves and their things in their own directions, going about their travels. And it really reminds you of how physical we are. We're computing professionals, and we think a lot about how fast our algorithms run or how much speed we can push packets through a network. Things seem kind of instantaneous, and that's all great when it comes to information and data and so on. But we still very much live in a physical world, in our physical selves. To make the point even bigger, this is the largest shipping container that you're seeing here in the world. Each one of these boxes is a semi-truck that you'd see on a freeway. And to give you a little sense of scale, this little thing over here is a full-size Coast Guard vessel. Incidentally, this was built out of Seattle. It's owned by a Chinese shipping line. And it's just a massive reminder of how much time and effort we put into moving physical things, including ourselves, in the world. I was the WIST program co-chair with Daniel Avrahami last fall. And Tokyo was the location for WIST. And it was a place that also reminded you of your physical body in the physical world, especially on the Tokyo subway at rush hour. It was quite an experience. Some of our most memorable and exciting experiences in life are actually the ones where we change how we experience the physical world. So I'm going to play a short video clip of someone bungee jumping that kind of drives this point home. When you see this video of someone bungee jumping, don't think about how it looks to you. Think about how it would feel for that person. And maybe some of you, can I see a show of hands, bungee jumpers? Okay. Hopefully we'll see you next year at Kai.
Here we go. 3, 2, 1, bungee! Woo!
All right, so what does all this have to do with HCI and design? Well, when we design things, we take our ideas and we give them form. We embody them in the world, whether they're paper sketches or paper prototypes, cardboard mock-ups, digital interfaces, pixels on a screen, electronic prototypes. All of these are embodiments of form that were originally our ideas and we manifest in the world. And let's not lose sight of how profound this is. When we make this move of taking our ideas and giving them form, we are doing something that for many ages humans have attributed to the divine. Our word for create comes from the Latin creare, which means form out of nothing. That from ideas, from just kind of nothing, we give something form. This is a profound move. The problem is we're not divine. And so we end up creating form. We end up creating embodiments in the world designed to be encountered by embodied people, but we can't anticipate always how those embodiments play out. And so we end up with a rigidly embodied world more often than we'd like. This is a screen from the University of Washington Student Center, the hub we call it. And there's a word on here that always kind of strikes me and rubs me the wrong way. Can anyone call out what the word might be? The word just. Just touch the screen. So this is an image of a touchscreen kind of information panel. The problem is it's not really just touch the screen, is it? What does it take to just touch the screen? Well, you have to be able to move your arm. You have to be able to suspend your arm from its shoulder. This is a wall screen, so it's vertical. You have to be able to reach out, extend the elbow, form a finger, land cleanly, don't slide, and lift from the same spot you touch, all in a reasonable time. There's a lot more to it than just touching the screen. We can think about the history, which actually Ben Schneiderman just shared with us, of HCI, and ask and question what abilities are required to use the inventions that we embody, the ideas that we give form to. These are just a few: the light pen, the mouse, the iPhone. What are the abilities a person must have to use each? And where do those abilities come from? So I call these ability assumptions. Whether designers mean to embed them or not, they are present in everything we embody. Do the assumptions reflect our own abilities? Do they reflect the abilities we imagine other people might have, or maybe the abilities of the average person. Let me tell you something about the flaw of averages. In the 1950s, the US Air Force in peacetime was losing a tremendous number of planes and pilots. It got so bad that they lost 17 pilots in one day, in one single day, pilots and planes in one day. And they attributed this to cockpit design flaws. So the Air Force said, okay, we're going to redesign the cockpits to better suit our pilots. And here's how we're going to do it. We're going to take 4,000 pilots. We're going to measure them on 140 different bodily metrics, anthropometrics, and performance metrics like reaction time and things. And we're going to design the cockpit to reflect the average of all of those values. And a young whippersnapper of a new scientist at the Air Force named Daniels, Dr. Daniels, comes along and says, I'm not sure this sounds good to me. So he did a little data analysis, and he said, what if I take just the 10 most important metrics out of those 140, and I give a 30% tolerance around each of those averages? I wonder how many of those 4,000 pilots would meet those 10 criteria, would fall within those bounds. How many do you think he found out of 4,000 pilots? That's right, 0. Not a single pilot fell within those limits. The fact is, people aren't that regular. We're all pretty different from one another. There's great individual differences in every population of people. And so then the Air Force decided instead, let's make the cockpits configurable from the 5th percentile to the 95th percentile on those measurements, and the crashes stopped. They allowed the pilots to configure the cockpits to their own personal dimensions and needs. So for the last, I hate to say now, I'm getting older, 15 to almost 20 years, I've been thinking a lot about people's bodies, how they move, how they act, and how that causes them to interact with computing technology. These are some shots from various different projects. Some of you will recognize. Some of you in the room have done these projects with me. And I'm going to share today a little bit about ability-based design, which is an understanding of how we can design better for human ability. Let's start by talking about ability in the first place. One definition I found was the possession of the means or skill to do something. And I highlighted do because it's very much an action definition, to do something, to take action in the world. Again, it's not just the realm of ideas, but it's taking action in our embodied selves in the embodied world. So disability has been defined in various ways and evolved as a definition over the years. This one was from 1976, the year I was born, and I've highlighted some text in red that today, by our sensibilities, we might find problematic. It says, any restriction or lack of ability to perform an activity in the manner or within the range considered normal for a human being. Fortunately, our understandings have evolved a little bit. We've moved away from some of this normative language. Today, disability is recognized by the World Health Organization as a complex construct that involves not just ability, but environment and context and activities, even social features. I'll highlight the environmental piece because that'll come up more later. I also like to think of a word disability with a hyphen in the middle to kind of set apart ability from its negation in a way. So if ability was the possession of the means or skill to do something, which I just showed you a moment ago, we could say disability is actually just not being in possession of the means or skill to do something. Just not having that. Well, if that's true, we all have disabilities. We all have dis-abilities because every one of us has a lack of the means or skill to do something, right? We all have limitations. If you think about other things about people that we ascribe qualities to people, like height or weight, some of these are positive valued only, right? We don't say you have dis-weight if you're particularly light, or that you have dis-height, right? They're just kind of from 0 up. But with ability, we actually do that. We have sort of a dis-notion below 0, and then ability kind of goes up from 0. What if we actually changed our thinking? What if we thought about ability as a positive valued quantity only, and we kind of removed the dis part below water there? How would that change our perspective? How would that change the way we design things? So I call this the positive affirmation of ability. Everyone has abilities. Some people have more than others. We need to design for people with abilities of all types. That's a human diversity commitment in my mind. And I'm not the first person to recognize this. You'll see lots of these little sketch images here of people that I admire and work that they've done. This is Alan F. Newell. He was the Social Impact Award winner from a few years back as well. He said, common sense and observation show us that every human being has a set of abilities, some of which can be described as ordinary, and some of which are very obviously extraordinary. And this idea has begun to find its way more into industry settings as well. So this is the inclusive design page at Microsoft, and they have some guiding principles. And I know it's small, so I'll read this. They say, solve for one, extend to many. Everyone has abilities and limits to those abilities. Designing for people with permanent disabilities actually results in designs that benefit people universally. Constraints are a beautiful thing, a positive affirmation of ability. Here's an image of an athlete, a national team athlete. What sport is this? Anyone know the name for this sport? Just go ahead and yell it out. Murder ball, that's right. It's probably the best named sport somehow. It's kind of morbid, I guess, but it's quite a name, murder ball. Wheelchair rugby, it's sometimes called. But think about wheelchairs. How many of us, without meaning to, just attribute the idea of disability to those little blue iconic drawings of a stick figure in a wheelchair with the kind of line drawing? And in this image, we have an athlete in a wheelchair, that iconic notion of disability, but he's jumping and diving and smashing a ball. So he has clear, extraordinary abilities, all put in one place. I like this image because it challenges our notion of what disability really is. Now, this positive affirmation of ability might sound like a nice idea and maybe comports with our modern sensibilities, but it wasn't always this way. Coming out of World War II, the idea of assistive technology was about helping you get back something you lost. So if you lost a leg, we'll give you a leg. You lost an arm, we'll give you an arm. You can't hear anymore, we'll help you hear with a magnified, ear. So we were helping people conform to the world that was already there as it was, so that you could again match the world you live in. Problem is, we still adapt ourselves to systems that have no idea how we're doing so. The system tells us how we have to live, how we have to work to make ourselves match what it wants. So the person with the hand stick here on the keyboard doesn't know that they're using a hand stick this way. This person up in the top here is typing with her feet because she lacks arms. These images down the side are of various different hand postures, or even using a trackball with your chin. None of these devices, none of these systems have any idea they're being used this way, but the humans using them feel the need to adapt themselves to these oblivious systems. And it's more complicated today than maybe 30 years ago, because today, computing environments have really changed. And the environment's effects on our abilities now add a whole nother dimension to ability. In the 1980s, a computer user probably could be assumed to be in a stable office environment. The heating wasn't changing, the lighting wasn't changing, they were comfortably seated, it probably wasn't too noisy, there wasn't glare on their screen, right? Very sort of sanitized computing environment. Today, we're computing all over the place, which is great, but it changes how our abilities manifest in the world. So this person's sitting on a beach with the laptop on their knees. It looks like it might be cold because they have a hat on. They're typing with glare on the screen. Very different computing environments. And of course, I'm not the first person to make this observation either. Alan Newell, in the same book, notes that a soldier with extraordinary personal abilities would still be disabled in their context of war. And if they were applying for a job, they would be considered an applicant with a disability. There's loud noises going off, they're covered in gear, they can't hear, they can't see very well, their goggles are foggy, and so on. If you need a more modern version, this is a Newsweek shot from Afghanistan. What are the abilities these soldiers have in this moment? Clearly different than perhaps even 5 minutes from now. So Andrew Sears and Mark Young called these situationally induced impairments and disabilities. Both the environment in which an individual is working and the current context, the activities in which the person is engaged, can contribute to the existence of impairments, disabilities, and handicaps. And we know this from work in this field. When you're walking, you have reduced reading speed, reduced motor accuracy. We know that you interact in about 4-second bursts. That's not very much time, looking back and forth from the screen. And you have reduced ability to maneuver and avoid obstacles. These are just some of the things at work on you just while walking, right? Just walking, let alone other more extreme things. And these are real challenges in the world. This is from Stockholm. These are real street signs. In Stockholm, they've given up trying to tell the people walking with their phones to stop doing it. So now they're warning drivers, don't run them over while they're doing it. I don't know if the person in the background is staged for this photo. If not, it's just too perfect, right? So this photo is of a street sign warning drivers to not run over people walking while texting. This is from Hayward, California. Heads up, cross the street, and then please, you can wait and update Facebook. But it's not just in Western countries. South Korea has begun putting 2 lanes on sidewalks, one for cell phone users and one for no cell phone users. Apparently, these are working well from the point of view of the people walking. They're behaving as they should. They're in their correct lane, but they're such a novelty that the lanes are getting crowded by people taking photos just like this one. And so they're having a bit of a social experiment trying to make this work. In Utah, not too far from here, they now have on the books that you can get a $50 fine for distracted walking. And if it happens twice, you get a $100 fine. And so that includes texting while walking. So be careful. I don't know about Colorado law. And of course, a much more serious issue is distracted driving. At any one time in the US, the data shows 660,000 people are texting while driving. Please don't do this. We all know, but what we actually do might differ. It's not just driving a car. It could be riding a bike. On the eastern seaboard during the summer months, there are a lot of resort towns, and people's bikes collide because they were updating Facebook. And this person's actually standing facing backwards while texting on his motorcycle. I don't know why, but I couldn't resist. These guys jumped out of an airplane to build the first website ever begun in midair and completed before hitting the ground. The point here is that situational impairments can be quite extreme. This website tool has no idea it's falling through the air at terminal velocity or near that. And we don't have to be that extreme to make the point. So this was from a woman I saw on the bus in Seattle, had one glove on and one glove off. I said, do you mind if I ask you why you have one glove on and one glove off? And she said, I don't mind. Here's why. I can't operate my phone with my glove on. I said, but your glove has those nice little capacitive tips on the thumb and the finger. She said, yeah, they get in the way. They get in the way. I said, but that's what they were made to help with. Yeah, but they get in the way, so she takes her glove off. So even when we intend for our designs to improve on these problems, we don't always get it right. And here are just some images of various situational impairments that happen in the world. Cold temperatures, working in the snow, distracted, so on. They don't all have to be in motion, right? You can be in a distracted office environment as well. So in my lab, we've spent a lot of time looking at various sources of situational impairment and treated them as accessibility challenges, which kind of unifies an approach to accessibility that can apply to everybody, not just so-called people with disabilities. So let's step back and ask what if here. What if we place the burden of conforming to ability assumptions on the technology, on our systems, instead of our people? What if our systems were aware of our situated abilities and supported them better? And what if we had a design approach that tried to take ability and situation into account? What if? How could we approach this? So ability-based design tries to do this, and it's a big objective, and we're not there yet, but that's the direction we're headed. A design approach in which the human abilities required to use a technology in a given context are questioned, and systems are made operable by or adaptable to alternative abilities. It starts with an attitude that we focus on all that people can do and make our systems do the work of accommodating their users better. That might seem easy or straightforward, but it does change your perspective. And there's some strategies, and it's somewhat strategy agnostic. We don't really care how you go about this, but that you go about this. So automatic ability-based adaptation, you'll see some examples. Some great work by Krzysztof Gajos from a few years back. High configurability by even the end user, like the the Air Force story. Ability-specific customization, where we customize designs for certain abilities. The problem there is we can't all have a personal designer, right? So how do you scale that? Richard Ladner's proposed that we empower people with disabilities to design custom solutions for themselves. And the maker movement, Sean Kane's worked in that, Amy Hurst also approaches that. That we also see an approach that's where we create things that are usable by a wide range of abilities. And that gets towards kind of a universal design idea. The idea, though, in the end, whatever strategy we take, is that systems match users' abilities. Users don't strive to satisfy systems' rigid assumptions. That's really what's at the heart of it. I'm going to show this through some simple visual language that I'm stealing from Alistair Edwards from 1995. And in his visual language, which I've now animated because it came from an old book, if the user and the system, if the user's abilities and the system's ability assumptions match well, then we really have no challenge from a usage point of view. And the world is great, and we go about our day. The challenge comes when the user and the system don't match in the abilities of the user and the ability assumptions or demands of the system. So what's a traditional approach is the user is required to procure the adaptation that makes the user acceptable to the system. And we saw examples of that before. So maybe this is a hand pointing stick or some other adaptive aid, and the system is no the wiser for it, right? The system doesn't know. So the burden is being driven by the system back to the user. And we want to make systems do more, right? I mean, we're a community that should be limitless in its appetite for putting more burden on the system and making systems smarter and better and more usable and so on. So why not have the burden flipped? Why not allow the user's abilities to inform the system? This is who I am. This is how I work. This is what I need. Match me. You do it, right? And so the system adapts or becomes configured or configurable, and we're back to a good fit. And of course, this doesn't take place in a vacuum. It takes place in a context, a situation. There's been good work there. I won't go into this today, but some of the work by Aninde, for example, talks a lot about what is context and how does that affect use and things. We can also look at a space of impairments and consider different dimensions here. So one of the dimensions of impairment is duration. I like to say it can move from ephemeral to enduring. I don't use the word permanent because we don't really know what is permanent, right? Science evolves, things change, people develop. But ephemeral to enduring. So at Chi, I'm not saying any of you, but some of us might have a drink or two in the evening. And if you have more than a couple, you might be impaired for a little while, right? It's a little bit more enduring than carrying a bag of groceries where the impairment ends when you set the groceries down. Or if you want to make it a little more meaningful, perhaps carrying an infant where you can't do certain things because you're carrying an infant. And then as we progress along the spectrum, we get to more enduring disabilities or impairments that stay with us longer and perhaps throughout our lives. On the other axis, we can consider the location of an impairment. Does it come mostly from within a person or from without, from the environment? You saw maybe Michael Jordan on the title slide for this talk, and the great basketball player, not the computer scientist in this case. And if I take Michael Jordan and I put him in a prisoner's straitjacket, it doesn't really matter he's Michael Jordan. He can't do very much, right? He's pretty impaired. It's a from without impairment. Astronauts are incredibly fit and trained people, but when they're spacewalking, they're pretty limited, right? They can do some things, but not everything. So on the other hand, if you're sleeping, it doesn't matter much where I put you. While you're asleep, you're not going to be able to do very much. Okay, so we have a space of impairments, and actually, we can lay this space out and look at all sorts of accessibility challenges throughout this space, which I won't go into because there's too many points, and I'm sure there are many others I missed. But I'll point out that in the bottom right corner is mostly where we spend our time with assistive technology, and there are a whole lot of other types of impairments we might address. So we're developing a richer space to address through an accessibility lens rather than just, oh, this is just for people, in the lower right corner, right, just for people with disabilities. So we formulated principles that help guide this work. I won't read these, but there are 3 that are required, and they deal with the designer's stance, the stance the designer takes in their work. A couple others deal with the interface and its adaptivity or adaptability, and then whether we sense or model the user or the environment. These are available in papers and things, so if you're interested, send me email. So let's contrast then to established approaches. So how is this different than assistive technology? It should become clear, right? We would like to reject the adaptations users are required to procure, right? How is this different than universal design? Well, it doesn't have to be, and universal design is a great thing in some cases, but ability-based design insists on a tighter fit between the user's abilities and the system. And universal design, in an attempt to kind of work for a wide range of people at once, doesn't necessarily prescribe to such a tight-knit fit. And so that sort of vagueness can sometimes be an issue. That idea also was echoed by Simon Harper when he talks about design for one. To create universal usability by designing for all involves making generalizations about users. And it's these exact generalizations that have led to so many users being excluded from the technological world in the first place. Universal usability is possible, but not by using this design for all ethos. It is only possible by design for one. I think that's a powerful idea as well. So let me give you a vision. I think it's ambitious, but what good is a vision that's not, right? That anyone, anywhere, at any time can interact with technologies ideally suited to their specific situated abilities, and that our technologies do the work to achieve this fit. That's my vision for ability-based design. Okay, now the fun part. With that background, I'd like to transition into projects, just in time for the arrival of my advisor, Brad Myers. He'll like the project part. Hi, Brad. You missed all the principal stuff, so we'll go straight into the fun toys. All right. So I don't have time to go through, obviously, all the projects that might speak to this, but I want to highlight a handful and let them kind of just wash over you. Fun part about this is I'm not going to show a single p-value on any slide. I'm not even going to show any experimental results because this isn't a paper talk and I don't have to. So we're just going to have fun with some prototypes and videos and let them speak for themselves. All right. I also want to, before I go into these, show the faces of many students, and in one case, a postdoc that I've worked very closely with over the years. Really, they're the ones who deserve credit for what you're about to see. And none of this would have happened without them. There are too many names for me to read, but some of you are in the audience, and I want to thank you. So I'm actually going to start with the very end of my dissertation work about a decade ago. And it's called Trackball EdgeWrite, which was the last version of EdgeWrite that we created, Brad and I. And the idea was this. People with spinal cord injury have the ability to use trackball and enter text, usually by hovering the cursor over the small keys on an on-screen keyboard. But that's a very slow and tedious process. And on this slide, you can see an on-screen keyboard with a key kind of filling up as the mouse dwells over that key. It's a very slow process, about a word a minute. But they have the ability to pulse that trackball in larger bursts because when you move quickly, when you move hard, the neuromotor noise in your system is overcome by the force you exert on the ball. So fine movements like these keyboards demand are actually very hard, but larger, more ballistic movements are easier. So the question was, could we leverage the ability and the device they already have, but to enter text in a different way? In this case, with gestures, could they write letters by using the trackball? And the answer is yes, and let's take a look. First, I'll show you how it looks to write this way, and then I'll show you a little bit of a news clip about this. speed you're seeing here is about 15 words a minute. It's about 15 times faster than a typical trackball approach. In this next clip, you'll see when word completion's added. The words are in fixed positions, so they don't require visual recognition. Once you learn where they are, you just complete automatically in the stroke. So this is obviously expert use, but we're showing what's possible here. So we worked a lot with one gentleman from the VA who had a spinal cord injury and relied on a trackball and an on-screen keyboard quite heavily. And there was a little bit of a news story done. I'll just play a short clip.
This is how it works. Bob places the trackball cursor inside the square on the screen. Then, moving the cursor toward the corners inside the box in a specific way, forms letters. This is the letter A. This is a letter B.
There, that's the actual in the F.
The result is a faster, easier way for people with disabilities to master small keyboards.
The whole point is to try and make it much more accurate to do text entry, which of course is a key requirement for any kind of use of computers.
The guided system has literally replaced Bob's traditional keyboard. Everything he needs now is in the palm of his hand. I'm Cynthia Demas reporting.
It was very gratifying for me that Bob was still using this technology about 8 years later as his primary form of text entry. So that raises their own set of challenges, which is a topic for another time. But when I came to the University of Washington, I got very lucky in that actually the day I graduated at Carnegie Mellon, I got this mysterious email from one Krzysztof Gajos, who I'd never heard of. That's Krzysztof Gajos for those of you who aren't married to a Polish woman like I am. And the email said, you just defended your dissertation yesterday. I've been following you from a distance. Will you be my co-advisor when you come to UW? It's like advisor stalking. And it was one of the best things that ever happened to me. So Krzysztof's a professor at Harvard. Many of you know him. And he did work on Supple. And Supple was a user interface generator. And what we did together was apply it towards optimizing interfaces for people's performance. So we'd have them do short human performance tasks and then drive the generators to create interfaces that were optimized for those performance models that we created. And so here on this slide, you see the default Microsoft Word font dialog box, and then one generated for someone with cerebral palsy, and another generated for someone with muscular dystrophy. And these are not generated with any heuristic knowledge about these conditions, just the performance these people exhibited in these simple tasks of pointing and dragging you see at the top of the screen. So let's take a short look at a video that explains this a little bit more. Oops.
To generate a customized user interface adapted to a person's motor abilities, Supple first collects information about how a person uses a computer. By observing the user perform various basic tasks such as pointing, dragging, clicking, and list selections, Supple builds a model of that person's unique motor abilities. Supple's optimization algorithm then calculates the interface that maximizes that person's speed when using a particular program. How does Supple do in making computers easier to use? Here are some real examples from our user studies. This is an interface you saw earlier, but now Supple has redesigned it to be the easiest to use for a person with cerebral palsy. This user could make fast but inaccurate movements and control the trackball with his chin. Notice that all of the elements in this interface are enlarged to make it easier to click on them with the mouse pointer, and the lists are expanded to reduce the need for scrolling. Now here is the same interface, generated by Supple, but now for a person with muscular dystrophy, who could make slow but accurate movements. Notice that all of the elements in this interface are smaller, more tightly laid out, and they are all presented in a single view, rather than being split across 3 tabs as was the case with the other interface. As these examples illustrate, no single design can address the needs of all users. A design that helps one person will be no good to a person with a different set of abilities.
The next ability assumption we question was, okay, so that's changing the interface to conform to people's abilities in pointing. Could we actually instead question the pointer itself, the mechanism by which we point, to make it better? And with work with James Fogarty and others, we developed the angle mouse. So the angle mouse isn't changing the interface, it's changing the mouse, the cursor, and its dynamics. And the idea is this. When people move, as I mentioned earlier, with a lot of force, they move in a ballistic fashion that keeps the spread of angles that you might sample as the cursor moves in a fairly tight distribution, like you see on the left here, or I guess your left. And when they get near a target they want to get into, they begin to correct, and that causes a big explosion of angular divergence. And you can measure that. You can see in the center picture, the angles kind of go all over the place with a simple overshoot and correction. And so what we can do is when we see that, we can actually drop the control display gain, which effectively makes the target bigger in motor space. Not visually, doesn't change on the screen, but in motor space, in the space the user's moving, the target gets substantially bigger, and they can feel that. And this is all without knowing, on our part, where the targets on the screen are, which actually turns out to be, even theoretically, a bit intractable.
A key insight of the angle mouse is to use the movement of the mouse, and in particular the angular movement of the mouse, to slow down the mouse pointer only when the user is near their target. In this video, the angle of mouse movement is shown on the screen as a gray dotted line. The angle of movement remains relatively consistent while the user moves toward the target, but spreads out considerably when the user begins to focus in on the target. The angle mouse uses this change in angles to slow down the mouse and to enable the user to more accurately select the target. Thus, the angle mouse works similarly to a race car, moving quickly on the straightaways and slowing down to handle the curves.
So in practice, those angle lines would never be drawn. They're just there for illustration, but it gives you an idea of what's happening. Another tool we created was the pointing magnifier. And along with the angle mouse, these were both put on the web and actually downloaded a large number of times. And we got a lot of emails saying how useful they were by people with disabilities. And in this case, in the pointing magnifier's case, we also got a small group of graphic artists to tell us that this was a very useful tool they hadn't found anywhere else. The pointing magnifier has the following insight. An area cursor, which is a bigger cursor than a single point, can cover multiple targets at once, but makes it easier to get over any one target. But when you click, you end up with ambiguity about which target is desired. If you actually make the click turn into a lens, and you bring up a much bigger set of targets that the cursor overlapped, but you don't make the cursor bigger, which is how this differs from a screen magnifier. You get no motor benefit with a screen magnifier, only visual benefit. But here you get motor benefit because the cursor stays its original size. You're effectively massively exploding both the visual and motor space here. It's probably better shown than described, but let's take a look. This is actually my daughter back when she was about 2, I think. And we'll see how this works.
Another innovation developed by Wobbrock and a team of colleagues is the pointing magnifier. It's an accessibility tool that turns the mouse cursor into a larger, circular area cursor capable of magnifying its content.
So you can see my cursor is no longer just a point, but it's an area. And as a result, all I have to do to use this is place it over the target I want. And the important thing to know about this area cursor is it acts as a lens. So let's say I want to click on this little shift checkbox here, and I have a motor impairment that makes it maybe difficult. I don't have to put a single little point cursor in that box. I can put this entire area cursor in the box. And when I click, I get a magnified view of that area. And then within that, I can select a much bigger now checkbox that is there.
Wobbrock hopes the angle mouse and pointing magnifier will help people with disabilities get the information they need to go about their lives.
Then we took our questioning even further and said, let's get rid of manual pointing altogether. What if you didn't have to use your hands at all? What if you could use your voice? And with James Landay and Susumu Harada, we explored voice draw, which is an artistic, expressive application, but where the painting would take place with your voice. Now, there's a challenge when I say that. If you're thinking speech when I say voice, then that's not quite right for what we did. Because speech issues discrete commands, but painting or movement in general is a continuous process. And mapping discrete to continuous spaces tends to not be a very good design approach. We want to map a continuous action to a continuous space. And we were able to do that with the vocal joystick, which you see in the upper left corner of this slide here. The vocal joystick was developed by Jeff Billings at the University of Washington and his team, and it allows you to make vocal sounds that aren't speech in a continuous fashion that form a continuous circle. So moving around the circle from Papa, we'd say, oh, yeah, and that was a complete circle. We can also add some discrete sounds like k and ch for certain actions as well. And this produced voice draw. Let's take a look first at the problem of discrete speech to continuous motion, and then I'll show you our solution.
Mouse drag down. Due to the limited number of movement angles and the stepwise movement speeds, the resulting stroke appears rigid and geometric. Upper left. Stop. Stop. When the speech recognizer fails to recognize the user's command, the pointer continues to move, leaving a trail of undesirable paint. Undo. Undoing a stroke can be costly, as the entire stroke must be recreated.
So the whole thing was lost because of a single misrecognized word. And this will just give you a little sense of what VoiceDraw
VoiceDraw is a hands-free, voice-driven drawing application that allows the user to generate fluid, free-form strokes using continuous vocalizations. For people with motor impairments, controlling the computer with speech can be an attractive option. However, performing continuous tasks such as drawing can be quite challenging using existing speech recognition systems.
So that gives you a sense. We actually applied this to gameplay, and as Ben Schneiderman insisted, as a community, we have to be out working with the users that we are trying to serve. And so we did just that. We actually found someone who was already self-described for many years as a voice artist. He lived in Berkeley. His name was Philip Chavez. And he had done many, many paintings using that first approach, which was Microsoft Paint and Dragon Naturally Speaking. And so we approached him and said, would you be willing to try something new? And he said, of course. He's an artist. Of course he's willing to try something new. And there was a little bit of a news story. I'll show you that, and then I'll show you some of the art that he was able to create.
This one's more
I'm working with SIGCHI Harada. He's a doctorate student at the University of Washington, and he's developed a simple paint program using basic vowel sounds.
Try the upper right again, the sound.
I really like many people to have access to the arts. And I think through technology, many people who didn't think they could express themselves in an artistic way can obviously do that now. It's just a matter of getting the word out to them. Okay. I've sort of dipped my toe into the deep end of the swimming pool, but I'm now ready to dive into the deep end. So diving is something I've done for many years. That's how I became disabled. And I'm really ready to start spreading my art out into the world.
So here is, we asked Mr. Chavez to choose a painting that he'd created that he was particularly fond of, that he'd already made in his current tools, and he chose this one. You can see the angular lines due to the discrete speech commands that he had available to him. And then we said, could you kind of remake this with our tool and just tell us what it's like and let us observe you? And he said, sure. So he actually produced this, which I actually think is quite beautiful. It's kind of Jackson Pollock style. We have this in my office at UW, silk screened. Unfortunately, the artist passed away not too long after we'd worked with him. So it's a particularly nice thing for us to have. I guess I told you I'd show no empirical results on this talk, but here's a tiny one. His original tooling took 9 hours, and with our tool, it only took 3. So even with a brand new tool, he was able to, with fairly minimal training, get up to speed. Here's another image as well. Then the world changed. Then mobile hit. And boy, we had a big question to ask at this point. So with Sean Kane and Jeff Bigham we asked the question, how in the world are people who are blind going to access and use the new wave of mobile devices that are touch screens? We'd been working with folks who were using flip phones, those clamshell phones that had tactile buttons and they could feel. But as soon as it's a flat piece of glass, all of that changes, right? And so with that question, we began to think about gestures that could be used instead of trying to hit defined targets on the screen. And slide rule was born. And slide rule incorporated a couple key insights. One is that you could read the screen with your finger, and the rate at which you moved would determine how much detail is read. So if you held still, it would read more. If you moved quickly across content, it would kind of summarize, maybe even skip. Now that might seem straightforward today, but back then screen readers were something you sort of triggered with keys on a keyboard on a web page or other desktop app, and you sort of let it go and it would kind of read in sequence. The idea that it was guided interactively by your finger was a new idea. And then the other thing we realized is, boy, as soon as you find something on that screen you want, like a target, like a button or a link or something to tap, as soon as you lift, you kind of lose sense of where you are and you become uncertain about when you come back down, will you hit that target or will you miss? Wouldn't it be great if you could just keep that reading finger on the screen, but your other finger on that same hand could hit anywhere on that big screen, or maybe back then small screen, and it would trigger the thing that just was read by your reading finger. This is better shown than described, so let's take a short look at slide rule in action.
Home. Phone book. Mail. Music. Phone book. Mail. Music. Phone book. Phone book. 10 contacts. A. Alec Baldwin. 1 of 10. A. Audrey Hepburn. 2. B. Bill Cosby. 3. F. Frank Sinatra. J. Jason K. Nicole T. Tom Cruise. Woody Allen. 10. Calling Woody Allen. Home. Phone book. Mail. Mail. 10 messages. 1. 2. Nicole. 3. 4. Will. 5. Mel Gibson. Gardenias. 5 of 10. Don't forget to water the plants. 3. 4. 5. 6. Frank Sinatra. What's up? 6 of 10. Reply to message. Home.
So you can see that second finger tap in there. A few years after Sean made that great video and built that great prototype, Sean Kane, and we'd posted the video online and we'd presented the paper at Assets, we got an email via Richard Ladner from Apple. And it was one of those gratifying but rare moments where an industry company let us know that our work had influenced them in some way. They said, we definitely read through the existing literature before starting VoiceOver, which is the accessibility suite of tools on the iOS. They said, I can say we were certainly aware of slide rule. We were quite excited to see the video when it popped up. So a little hint there that we had some impact and influence on their work. Their version of what I've been calling second finger tap is called split tap, which is so much better. But I guess you have to have a fancy marketing department to get good names like that. We missed our chance, Sean. And then the question was, could we apply this same idea to other media, not just a touchscreen phone? So we looked at, for example, applying the idea to paper. So Sean built a great prototype that was called Access Lens, which allowed a camera to view surfaces, including paper, or ATM screens, for example, that aren't touch screens, and allow the finger to read the content. Here's a quick snippet to show you that.
Rainier Valley, West Seattle, downtown, Capitol Hill, downtown.
And we were able to do that successfully on touch screens as well. I mean, on non-touch screens, make them touch screens effectively, like this ATM screen. Another ability that we hadn't really touched on yet was forms of literacy. And so if you are blind, you may know Braille, and you may be actually able to enter Braille with a Perkins Brailler, which you can see here with the numbered keys. And it's a way of inputting Braille to computers or for production in print. The letter R is shown as an example. So Sherry Azencott and Richard Ladner and myself and others said, what about doing this on touchscreen phones, and wouldn't that be a nice way of entering text onto phones or tablets for people who are blind? And we also had to handle certain things, like You don't have tactile buttons like you do in a Perkins Brailler. And the fingers may drift. So how do we track the fingers over time and allow the system to kind of keep up with how the user's fingers may move? And here's Perk Input in action.
A user begins typing by registering reference points.
I space C A N space I N P U T space T E S T space U S I N G space P E R K I N P U T.
A user can also enter text on a phone twice as fast using two phones.
Connecting. I space C A N space U S E space T W O space P H O N E S space T O space G O space F A S T E R.
Perk Input can also be used to enter text on a tablet.
O R space U N E space T H E space T A B L E T space W H I C H space I S space F A S T E S T.
You can see quite high speeds there. Some of these ideas have actually found their way into product as well. The Braille Note Touch by Humanware has a feature called Touch Braille, and they actually talk about the calibration of fingers, very much like we've done, and also the virtual keys that will find and track your fingers as you type. So we're seeing some of these ideas cross over as well. A more general approach to touch accuracy and touch input has come with Smart Touch, which is a project that Martez Mott, who's in the audience here, and I have worked on, along with Sean Kane and Radu Daniel Vatavu, who's also at CHI this year. And the idea is to allow a user to touch in whatever way they naturally touch for a target thereafter and make the touch screen figure out what they're intending to touch. Because if you're touching a screen, remember that just touch the screen example from the beginning of the talk, you may actually touch with many points of contact, you may slide across the screen, you may have multiple challenges in getting the touch screen to register your touch. So could we actually make the screen understand where you're intending to touch?
Although touch input has been widely adopted, it remains largely inaccessible for many people with motor impairing disabilities such as cerebral palsy and muscular dystrophy. To improve upon the limitations of touchscreens, we created Smart Touch, a novel three-step algorithm capable of mapping any number of arbitrary contact areas to our users and...
Whoops. Sorry. I wanted to show, just a moment there.
Although touch input has been widely adopted, it remains largely inaccessible for many people with motor impairing disabilities such as cerebral palsy and muscular dystrophy. To improve upon the limitations
of touchscreens, I was going to point out that the hand in the upper left image there is touching the screen in multiple points at once. Right? You can see 5 points probably of that hand.
First, Smart Touch analyzes a user's touch process to extract the most relevant touch data. Second, the extracted touch data is compared to previously observed touch templates. Third, the location of the user's intended touch point is predicted by leveraging information stored in the best match template. Smart Touch was designed to accommodate two observed behaviors.
So in the case of Smart Touch, we're using template matching to resolve the intended touch point at runtime. And we've had some good success with that, and we're continuing to see if we can extend that to other types of touch platforms. I mentioned early on in the talk about the effect of environment. I want to show a couple quick projects that have taken that challenge on. One is WalkType that was led by Mayank Goel, who's now a professor at Carnegie Mellon. And the idea was that we could actually infer which foot is landing as you step based on the signal from the gyroscope. And by knowing that, we actually observed a systematic shift in thumb position as the thumbs strike the keys while you walk. They actually rotate inward just slightly, as you can see here in this image. And if we can actually correct for that, we can make the keyboard much more accurate even while you're moving. So the keyboard in the upper left there has a number of red dots where the keys were intended but hit incorrectly due to walking. And with a decision tree and this signal from the gyroscope, we can actually correct those points and make them map to the correct key after all. And walk type was able to give us almost a 50% accuracy improvement while walking, which is a big gain. And then we went on to look at grip. How does holding a device actually affect your ability to act with it? Have you all grabbed your phone at some point and tried to pinch to zoom with one hand, like you see in the picture here? That's a very painful and non-dexterous way of working with your phone, but you might have done that if you are carrying that infant or bag of groceries, or maybe you don't have another arm, or whatever the reason, you had to do this with one hand. So we were actually able to detect pressure with just a single hand, even though there's no built-in pressure sensor. And that was through a clever trick where if you pulse the vibration motor just very, very briefly and measure the dampening of the gyroscope, you can actually tell how hard someone's pressing. So you can zoom in and out with just pressure. And we can see that here.
GripSense combines a number of phenomena to detect hand posture. Because of the shape and position of the thumb, users often draw an arc when using their thumbs. These arcs have distinctly different shapes for both thumbs. However, while using index finger, there is no such arc. Shape and position of the thumb also leads to different touch sizes when we touch different areas of the screen in different grips. The touch size on the same side as the thumb will be smaller than the touch size on the far side. Combining these phenomena together leads to a robust grip detection system that infers between different hand postures within first 5 interaction steps. This means posture is detected before the user even completes 2 words while typing. GripSense uses a novel combination of gyroscope and vibration motor to infer pressure applied on the screen. We trigger the vibration motor when a user touches the screen. Here on the right you can see the pressure values derived from a pressure sensor, and on the left you can see the vibration information of the device. It is evident that the vibration of the device decreases with increase in pressure. While using devices with one hand, users often feel the need for a robust and intuitive alternate input method. Here, users zoom into a map by pressing hard, and light touch helps the user zoom out. This can be useful in
So allowing better, more successful, less impaired one-handed interactions was something GripSense helped us achieve. Recently with Alex Mariakakis at UW, we did a project called Switchback, and the idea was that if you remember, you interact with your mobile device while on the move in about 4-second bursts of time. One of the challenges, and you may all be able to relate to this, is if you're reading something and you look away, when you return your gaze to the screen, you often are kind of above where you left off. This is a common thing people experience. And you have to kind of regain your footing where you were to resume the task that you had. But that costs a lot when you only have 4-second windows. So Switchback tracked your eyes with the front-facing camera, and as you read your favorite Lorem Ipsum article, and looked away, when you returned your gaze to the screen, it would highlight the line that you most recently left off and allow you to resume from that point. And so we found that it would be it's a much better way of resuming tasks as you return your gaze to the screen. Here's just a quick
Switchback is built upon our focus and saccade tracking, which uses the mobile device's front-facing camera in 2 ways. Saccade tracking observes the user's gaze as it jumps to different parts of the screen. Here, we show saccade tracking being used in the context of reading. Every large gaze jump across the screen corresponds to a new line being read. If the user becomes distracted, he risks forgetting where he last read. With Switchback, however, the system can highlight where the user had stopped. Focus tracking monitors the user's attention. As the user walks off the bus, he must look away from his device. Once the user returns his focus to the screen, Switchback can draw his attention to where he left off, allowing him to quickly resume reading.
Okay. And one last project I can't resist describing. It's actually in progress right now, so I don't have any results. But we did want to see if we could address inebriation with your smartphone. in a way that your phone would know or be able to tell if you are under the influence. The use case for this is something like having people be able to opt in to using their phone for this detection to achieve a reduction in their car insurance before they drive, let's say on Friday and Saturday nights. Or that if the phone detects that they're under the influence, it could contact a loved one. So we're doing a pretty extensive human performance study. It probably is the most popular study for those 21 and older at the UW campus right now. And we're trying to see if we can extract enough signal from performance data, like some tapping and text entry and even just holding the phone flat and other things in order to get signal about someone's abilities and how they're affected there. So that's work in flight. We'll see how that turns out. So let me end with some reflections and a couple final notes. In these projects, I hope you've seen that we want to find out what users can do and enable them to do it. And that's kind of the premise of the approach. We really adopted the same design stance for people of all abilities. There's not been a big difference in how we've approached the mobile scenarios or the projects that were intended directly for people with disabilities. I don't think there's any intermediary assistive technology add-ons that were in any of these projects. A lot of them had an approach that sensed the user's performance or something about the context, modeled that, and then did some adaptivity or adaptation. Some of the projects allow a lot of end-user configurability, and some of that came through in some of the videos. And the technologies were generally a bit more aware of their users, right? They were trying to kind of meet the users where they were. Just a note on future work. You're all familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and it stands that if you have needs, you have abilities to meet those needs, or they're not very good needs because you can't meet them. So we also might think of an ability hierarchy. We explored a lot in kind of sensory motor and some cognitive aspects of ability today, but there are more abilities kind of up the pyramid. We did some with literacy and some with expressive, creative abilities, but I think there's more we can explore there. What about generalized ability profiles, right? That your ability profile follows you through the world. And of course there are privacy concerns and things, but wouldn't it be great if every user approaching every system, every terminal, whether public or private, it knew something about what they could do, and it gave them the system they needed. This is the vision of Greg Vanderheiden in his Global Public Inclusive Infrastructure, or GPII project, and there's much in common with what you've heard today. You've seen a lot of explicit training, where users had to go through a training phase and then we would adapt. But implicit training, while the user's working with a system in the wild, is a more powerful, natural way to work. And we've done a little bit of work there with Abby Evans in understanding users' performance without task models. But that remains open for future work as well. I shared with you before a vision, but actually I want to change that into a grand challenge. And I want to challenge you. You're here at this talk for some reason, maybe just because you're my friend, thank you. But if you're here and you don't know me, then you have an interest in this topic. And so I want to ask you, and I want to put to the community this grand challenge. What part of this challenge can you see yourself in? I think it's big enough and hard enough that there's a role to play for anyone who wants to play it, right? And I think the idea of putting more on our technologies and less burden on people, on users, on those for whom all of this work is taking place is the right direction to go. I'll end with a quote from Frank Bowie. He's called the father of Section 504. And I found this at the end of an article he wrote way back 30 years ago in January 1987. So for 30 years, these thoughts have been around. And hopefully we can feel like in another 30 years we've made that much more progress. It says, when society makes a commitment to making new technologies accessible to everyone, the focus will no longer be on what people cannot do, but rather on what skills and interests they bring to their work. That will be as it always should have been. I couldn't agree more. I want to encourage you to join the SIGCHI accessibility community. And you click this login to join button, which is hard to see, and it took me a while, but that's where you go. Jennifer Mankoff's the chair, and we want to grow this number, so Please go join that community. A lot of people to acknowledge beyond just the students' faces you saw on the previous slide. I won't read all these names, but hopefully you can find yourself in here or trust me that you're there. And I'll end there. Thank you very much. It looks like we have time for 3 or 4 questions, it seems. So fire away.
Just quick. Hi, Chris Framberger, TU Vienna. Thank you very much for your talk. It's very inspiring to see what you do, and I think you make a very convincing argument for your kind of approach. I want to challenge your grand challenge a little. Does the focus on fit maybe also distract us from asking questions about other systems in terms of what are meaningful roles for of technologies in the lives of disabled people? Are we not limiting ourselves to kind of look at that too narrow and sort of like making existing systems accessible by focusing on that fit, rather than maybe also thinking bigger and saying, what are the systems that make things smart or meaningful in the lives of disabled people?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. You're trying to broaden, as I hear your question, you're trying to broaden the role of technology into areas beyond just kind of fit and use, into more meaning context. I don't think these are opposed. I think these are actually complementary objectives. So I would contend that if we don't achieve good fit, we kind of limit how much meaning we can produce. But if these two things can kind of work together, I think that both fit and meaning can arise, right? And so I would say that that's actually, it might cause a bit of a rewording of the vision, and that's fine, that's great. I like the expansion of that, but I think these goals are complementary goals.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Hi, this is Ed Cutrell at Microsoft Research. Thanks, Jake. That was actually wonderful. Now, one thing about almost all the projects that you showed us here, whether it was a person working with a system, and it's sort of this one-to-one kind of thing. But one of the things that makes people unique, especially and one of the unique strengths of us, is our sociality and the fact that we work together in a lot of ways. Yeah. And I wonder if you could reflect a little bit on that challenge you have and the way that it actually addresses that in the way that we work together.
Yeah, that's really good to push on. Actually, I don't think the phrasing of the challenge probably does quite. So it does say anyone, right? Now, that could be, I suppose, any group or any collective of some kind. I would say that if there is kind of a prerequisite here, like if we can't successfully interact as individuals, it's still hard then to interact well as groups, right? But you're right, that people help other people. There are ways of leveraging the communities, and it gives purpose and meaning, back to the first question about this. I will point out that in this hierarchy of abilities, as I've drawn it, mapping to what you don't see here are the original needs, but they're social and relational and communicative abilities kind of in the middle here. And I think those are actually very important. So this is a great place to go for future work, and you're seeing the limitations of what I've done so far, but I like that you're pushing on that, so thanks for your comment. Yeah.
Thank you. My name is Isaac Holman at University of Cambridge and Medic Mobile. As I was listening to your talk, I was reflecting on an important role model for me and a relative who I grew up knowing as Uncle Chuck the inventor. And he worked at Bell Labs many decades ago. And one of his main projects was inventing a system for telebraille for switchboard operators. Very old school communication technology. And I was reflecting on what he would think of your presentation. And the first thing is that he would think it was awesome, and he would love to see this work continued. Also, he was in the Seattle area. The other thing is, with telebraille in particular, there wasn't a strong desire or need among blind people to want to be switchboard operators in particular. There was a desire to be employed. And there was a building of a technology involved in that project, but it was first and foremost changing the work, how the work goes on. And so I was wondering if you've explored ability-based design with a focus on service design, or if you know work in that area that, it may involve UX work or new technologies, but that it's about kind of reimagining what work is done to create new opportunities for people.
Yeah, that's great. So I'm actually going to edit my future work slide and make another one after all these questions. These are great. You've all pushed on really good aspects of this. So I actually teach some service design in a course, but it hasn't been so much the focus of my research. And I really haven't thought too hard yet about ability-based design's intersection with service design, but my initial reaction is that I think it actually could be quite applicable, because when we are looking whether they're at a kind of physical or digital products and the sort of user experience, or looking at people's ability to have their needs met via services, we still need accessibility, right? And it doesn't matter whether it's a service for someone on the go and impaired in certain ways, or a service for someone with a more traditional disability. An ability-centered approach, I think, can be the right one to take, right? We don't want services that are trying to, for example, make someone access those services only by looking like everyone else, right? We want the service to meet their abilities where they're at and then serve their needs. I think that's a really great point for future exploration. Thanks.
Thanks.
I think I'm being given the time signal, so we'll have to cut it off there. Happy to talk up front a little bit more. Thank you very much for coming, and thank you for the award.